Okay, it's not collapsing like last time. It's not just going out. We're good.
What? Have you tried nuclear plants?
I've not tried nuclear
You
plants.
should try those next.
This is live, by the way.
Okay, that's
Oh yeah, this is all live.
Howdy, everyone.
Perfect.
Welcome to Reasonable Faith. We're so glad to have you here. Just a couple of announcements. It's April, and the semester's winding down, and so I think we only have like 3 more meetings after this. So, fun times. The one thing I did want to mention is that I think it's the weekend of the 27th of April, we'll be having a debate night over in Phase 8, which is AKA mine and Seth's, and also Rob, but he's not here right now. What?
29.
29th.
Yes.
The weekend of the 29th. I need like a teleprompter, just like going through exactly what I'm supposed to say, or just like write it on my hand. On the 29th, anyway, the 29th is when we're actually having a debate night, and we'll have the most recent debate between Justin Bass and Bart Ehrman come, or I'm sorry, they won't be there. We'll be watching them, and there will be dinner, and there will be fun times. So if you know anybody who would be interested in that, just let them know. Other than that, we hope that you're doing well in your finals. And that's pretty much all I have on my count. Alan, if you want to go ahead and introduce our speaker.
We're also going to Canes afterwards.
In theory.
No, that's what's happening.
Cane's Filet.
Okay, also, I'll mention before, and then I'll introduce our speaker, but so next week I'm going to be talking about the Old Testament, and also the 3 weeks from now I will be. So if you have like questions, challenges, something that you would want me to address, please let me know. But we're going to try to show like some of the reasons for trusting the Old Testament, some of the positive evidence, and then also deal with, there are admittedly some very challenging passages for us to try to come to grips with. Well, what does this mean? And, does the Bible promote slavery, or was there really genocide? All those kinds of issues are worth really addressing. So we're going to talk about those kind of things and many more. Let us know what you want to talk about. For tonight, I'm really glad that Amy Davison, my friend from church at Lake Point, is able to come and be with us. She's actually spoken, she was telling me 6 weekends in a row she was out of town speaking. She's been discovered as this really great speaker on a lot of the kind of topics that she's going to be covering here. Some of y'all may have heard her give the talk on the Bible and sexuality, which was really interesting and fantastic, and today's focus is more on marriage, but thanks so much, Amy. She has some master's training. She was at Southwestern Seminary. She's got a lot of education and study in the relevant topics, and is also a very effective communicator, so we're really privileged to have her here. Thank you so much for coming out.
Great. No, I think I need to thank you all for coming out, because goodness, y'all are in the midst of finals.
Not quite yet.
Not quite yet. Awesome.
There are this last round of tests, though, that gets people sometimes.
Oh, goodness. I was going to say, because if you're in the midst of finals and you're here, props to you. Otherwise, I'm just a source of your procrastination, which I can empathize with, because procrastination is one of my love languages. So thank you all for being here. I'm excited to be able to talk about this subject in particular, because I think it's one that's kind of been lost within culture, or one that's been vilified. And so for us as a church to really spark that revival, we almost have to get back to the core concepts, not only of the faith, but God's design for who we are as people, as well as institutions that he created. First and foremost, the institution of marriage, which is actually the very first institution that God ever put into place. It was not actually created by government, as what we think of today, but in fact, biblical marriage. And the whole concept of marriage was designed by God. Now, I understand that there are going to be some people in the room who may not share a faith, the Christian faith. And so this is going to be coming from a Christian worldview perspective. You can feel free to disagree. We can discuss. I am one that is open to debate. I am not easily offended. And so I just hope that we can have good dialogue, that we can respect each other's ideas, as well as we dive into God's design for marriage, its impact on children, as well as its impact on our society and men and women as a whole. So what is marriage? Oftentimes we get confused on this concept because marriage is now used to describe, ever since the overturning of Obergefell around 2016, two consenting adults. But this actually isn't what marriage is. So that is what we consider as civic marriage or civil marriage. So civic or civil marriage is an institution that's sort of endorsed by the government and is shaped by culture. Up until the overturning of Obergefell, it actually matched or mirrored biblical marriage. It was one man, one woman joined together within marriage. And the goal was the protection of the family. So the Defense of Marriage Act, which was brought in by Clinton, was actually put in for the sole benefit of protecting the children. Because it's one thing that's unique about marriage is today we often think of it as adult-centric, as man and woman. It's about finding your one true love and being married and having an Instagram-worthy marriage and following life. But actually marriage is one of the best institutions for protecting the family. Now, with the overturning of Obergefell, that definition of marriage shifted to not one man, one woman. It's now two consenting adults. And even that number two, we're actually seeing that number coming into conflict. So I don't know if any of you are familiar. Who's ever heard of a throuple? Okay, a couple people, mostly on this side. So our culture today, this side is very in tune to culture. There is a rising trend of what's called a throuple, which is three people of varying, it could be two men, one woman, two women, one man, three women, three men. It's three adults that have decided to join together to form a family, basically, to rear children. This can even include up to 4 partners. And we're actually seeing in states like Utah, polyamory and polygamous marriages, the fines for each of those have basically been reduced to a traffic ticket. So if you find yourself, you're a gentleman and you have 3 wives and the police find out about it, you might get like a $35 fine. You move on with your day after you pay it. So our understanding of civic marriage actually shifts with culture as well. So it's very possible that within the next 5 to 10 years, even that idea of two consenting adults being joined together actually changing. But that is not what biblical marriage was. So biblical marriage was actually instituted by God because it expresses and nurtures 3 core beliefs. And not just beliefs, but 3 core aspects of who we are as human beings. So I asked in our last talk, what did everybody hear about sex? And most people, it's like, well, my parents didn't talk to me or tell me anything. Others got the whole health class thing of, in 4th grade where the girls and guys separated and you watch that video on puberty. And I asked the group, well, how many of you were taught that what you do with your bodies is actually an expression of your entire worldview? And nobody had raised their hands. In fact, I've given this talk for the past 1.5 years, and over this 1.5 years, I've talked to upwards of thousands of people now, and I've only had 4 people raise their hands. And that's exactly what sex is. Sex expresses what we believe about God, truth and morality, who we are as human beings, sin, salvation, the purpose of human history. And even within marriage, we see these core questions also being answered and nurtured within the family unit. So the purpose and design of marriage is not only rooted in biology, it also has psychological implications as well as spiritual. So we're going to start a little backwards. We're going to start with the spiritual. So why did God join man and woman? Why did man leave his father and his mother to be united with his wife, and the two shall become one? It is actually symbolic of God's relationship to the church. So as you've read through the Old Testament, you will see that it's constantly God and his church being united together. That's the whole goal. In fact, when Israel actually rejected God, they're not called as being like wandering, or as, today Christians are often called, oh, I'm not sinful, I'm just messy within progressive Christianity. Well, ancient Israelites weren't called messy, they were called adulterers. And why is that? Because when they turned their back against God, it was seen akin to adultery. They were rejecting the God whom they were supposed to be united for forever, for these other spiritual religions. And that's the same within marriage. Marriage was designed to communicate very core spiritual truths. First and foremost, it's meant to be one man, one woman, united for life. Just like it's supposed to be God and his people united together forever. And what's amazing about that is that also plays into our family role. So one husband, one wife. What happens when the husband and wife come together? Children naturally follow. And children are not accidents, that happen after maybe 1 too many glasses of wine. They are actually symbolic of the flourishing that we are to have when we are united with God. It communicates clear spiritual truths within it. And this spiritual nurturing plays in directly into the biological and psychological. So, if you've been studying biology, you will know that during the act of sex, specifically during an orgasm, there's different hormones that are released within the brain. So, within the female brain, during orgasm, one of the chemicals that's released is called oxytocin. Who's familiar with oxytocin? Okay, a couple people in the room. Oxytocin is a pleasure hormone. It feels good, but it also has another aspect of it. It nurtures bonding. So, when a woman and a man during orgasm, the woman is actually bonding with her husband. And not only just bonding with her husband, oxytocin is also released in the female's brain when she's nursing her baby. It nurtures bonding with children. So we see this cyclical effect. When oxytocin is released in the brain, it bonds husband to wife, which is why after sex, mom and dad are real flirty in the kitchen, totally grosses out the kids, you know? That's that natural bonding. They're reunited together. But it also helps nurture the mother. She wants to protect and nurture her own baby, which is why after delivery, one of the very first things the doctors and midwives do is encourage a mother to nurse her baby. Not even before they clean off the baby. You just go, you want to nurse it because, again, this nurtures the baby and also encourages the mother to bond with her child. So a similar hormone is released within the male brain during orgasm, and it's called vasopressin. So vasopressin is called the monogamy molecule, and that's because vasopressin, when it's secreted in the brain, it motivates the husband to bond with the wife. So now you have that mutual bonding, but vasopressin also has a similar makeup like oxytocin. It actually nurtures the husband to want to nurture and protect his own biological children, which is why you see this cyclical effect of bonding. So during the act of sex, wife is bonding to husband, husband bonding to wife, and they're equally motivated and nurtured to protect the children. And this has immense psychological impacts as well. So again, every time of sex, we're rebonding, we're redrawing closer together. In fact, one thing you've noticed is that couples who are going through marriage counseling, if they're struggling with emotional intimacy, it's often tied to physical intimacy as well. Their sex drive is also dropped as well. There's interesting correlations there. And not only that, within a family unit, husband and wife join together, they're affectionate and loving. What studies have found is that children see their parents holding hands, talking to each other, playing and being giggling. Yes, they might roll their eyes at it. What it actually does is nurtures a comfort within the child. They actually feel secure and cared for within the family. So God's design not only blesses the mom, the dad, and they're motivated to take care of the children, it also reaffirms confidence within the children. They're loved, they're cared for, and that they can have confidence within their family relationship. Now again, this is the ideal. Unfortunately, so much of our society is broken, especially within the aspects of marriage. Most kids will grow up, unfortunately, experiencing divorce. And so if this is your case, again, I share this not to be shaming or accusatory at all, but to show how God's original design actually is most ideal, not only for the husband and the wife, but also for the child as well. And why it's important. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of leading factors today that are motivating people, even Christians, away from the concept of marriage. Often this is because of false ideas within culture of what marriage is. And if you want to know what culture believes about marriage, honestly, just go flip on a show like Modern Family or any sitcom. It's usually very toxic. Think of like King of Queens, Everybody Loves Raymond, Everybody Loves Raymond. All the dynamics are the same pretty much. It's a skinny, beautiful, naggy wife and an overweight, bumbling husband, and they mutually bag on each other right in front of the kids. The kids are encouraged to be disrespectful, and that's kind of this culture's view of marriage, of what they expect marriage to be like. Not only that, you also have the influence of pornography shaping people's view of what bonding should be. So pornography is widely accessible. Kids as young as 6, 7, and 8 years old, that's the average baseline exposure to pornography because it can just be emailed to the phone. And it perpetuates this false idea of what intimacy, love, and relationships are supposed to look like. So for women, we're projected as someone who's supposed to look like Kim Kardashian, who's supposed to be scantily clad and sexually aggressive toward the men. And when men are watching this, especially from a young age, what they are being told by culture is this is how women are supposed to dress like and act like, and this is how you're supposed to treat them. And then when they get boring or they start being commitment oriented, well, then you just toss them aside and move on to someone else. And this has a profound impact on our children because kids today, they did a survey and they asked boys specifically, they said, hey, do you think what you're watching within pornography is an accurate representation of what relationships are supposed to look like. 60% of them said absolutely, and I can't wait for it to happen to me. But yet, with pornography, it's deeply dehumanizing and objectifying, toxic, and not an accurate reflection of reality. However, most kids today, that's the most they get for relationships, which is why it's so important for us to actually teach what marriage is supposed to be and marital roles within it. And so as I said, there's a lot of pushback between how we view marriage. For one, I said was society's perception and lies of what marriage is supposed to be. Like it can't be this fun, nurturing, sacrificing unto one another relationship. Instead, it's supposed to be very self-oriented, almost utilitarian in nature. Like if this relationship is working for me, if I'm getting what I want, then I'll keep with the relationship. But the second I have to start sacrificing for somebody else, I'm out of there, and I'm going to go and find somebody else to have this next fling. Oftentimes, our view of marriage can also be warped by past damaging relationships that we have experienced within our own lives. Whether that is maybe an unhealthy mother-father relationship that we grew up with, an early experience of divorce, very often shapes how we view our own marital relationships. I've seen this firsthand with friends, family members, co-workers, children who experience divorce. Many of them have the common rhetoric of, I am not going to get married, because once you get married, it's, there's kind of this phrase of first come love, then come marriage, then comes baby in the baby carriage, then comes the secretary, then comes divorce. Like that's what they think is the natural progress of things. And especially if they see a very toxic divorce, meaning there is a breakup of the family, and then the parents start attacking one another and the children are used as pawns in this attack. Very often those children will not want to go into marriage themselves because they think that's what marriage is. And that's why it's so important for us when we look at our relationships, we conduct ourselves well, because how we relate to one another, especially within a marriage, directly not only impacts our children's future understanding of what a relationship should look like, it also completes and conveys spiritual realities. So those same people who have a very damaged view of what marriage is often struggle to have a Christian relationship as well, because they understand implicitly that God, when we think of God the Father and Christ's relationship to the church, is all within this marriage concept. In fact, at the beginning of Genesis, we see it begins with a marriage, and in Revelation, it ends with a marriage ceremony. Marriage is used throughout it. But if we have a warped view of marriage, then our view of God is also going to be warped. And most people who've gone through these struggles will actually struggle in their relationship with God because they have no way of having a positive reconciliation between these concepts of spirituality, marriage, and even Christ as the father figure. So that's why it's so important on how we understand marriage. Now, another thing that can warp our understanding is also the misuse and abuse of marital roles. And I don't think many of us have to think too hard on this. It's often the source of cult-like behaviors or even oppressive religious situations, to where the husband, as the head of the family, is more of like this dictator role who controls all of the family members. The wife just has to be quiet, submissive. She has to lose all autonomy. She has to lose all of her identity. Instead, her identity, her value, her worth is based on what she does for her husband and her husband's approval of her. And then this trickles down into the kids. Again, we often see this play out in very strict religious settings. Cult-like settings often warp this understanding of marriage as well. But that was not God's design for marriage. Now I'm going to ask you, how many of you have ever heard of submission within marriage? Okay, how many of you have ever heard of submission referring to the husband? Okay, a couple people, okay. But what about submission to the wife? Is it usually the wife or the husband you hear that's supposed to be the most submissive? Go ahead and yell it out. Wife. Wife is always hit as the submission, and that's actually not true. When we look at God's design for marriage, we actually see it's completely reciprocal, and what it is each person sacrificing themselves as Christ sacrificed himself for the church, for the other person. So when we are living for our spouse, and our spouse is living for us, what is being met? Our needs, every single time. Now, it's not perfect. Again, we're flawed human beings. I've been married now 16 years. My husband and I have been together for a total of 17 years. we've had great patches of marriage, and we've had not so great patches of marriage. I love Billy Graham's wife. She was asked one time, she goes, "Will you ever, in all your marriage, have you ever considered divorce?" And she goes, "Divorce? No. Murder? Yes." And Billy Graham's wife, I love it, but it's so true. It really is, because there are times within marriage where you're just like, you know what, a pillow over you at night would be awesome right now. But when we actually look at God's design for marriage, we see that it's actually sacrificing for each other, not the wife disproportionately losing herself for the sake of validating her husband. And we can actually see this in Ephesians 5. So I'm going to read this directly from Scripture because I think it's really important. So it starts in Ephesians 5 within verse 22. And here's what's interesting. What you'll notice is when you start doing a dive into Scripture regarding husbands and wives in a relationship together, what you'll notice is not as many words are said to the wife as to the husband. He talks, especially Paul, he talks a lot more to the husbands than he does the wives, which I find really interesting. But of course, we've got the wives, submit your husbands as you would unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church and his body, of which he is the Savior. Now the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Now, if you are a third and fourth wave feminist, that is going to rub you all the wrong way. Because one of the biggest challenges for our culture today, especially among women, is the idea of submission. Because what we see with submission is basically like a speed bump that just gets constantly ran over. Like, that's what we think of as submission. But when we actually see here at this very beginning, for Christ is the head of the church, so we are submissive unto the husband. The husband is supposed to be like Christ. Now think back, how did Christ treat those around him? How did he conduct his ministry? He was patient, he was kind, he sacrificed himself for the world. He listened, he did not reduce people to their sin, instead he upheld their humanity. He uplifted women. In fact, that's one of the early signs that a community had actually become Christian, was their treatment of women. Women were actually elevated out of the subject of objects, but instead were seen as actual human beings worthy of respect and dignity. And that's how Christ treated the church. I don't know about you ladies, but if you've got an individual, a man, who loves you completely, who knows all of your flaws, but still thinks you're absolutely beautiful, that you are worth dying for, that you are precious, that he would sacrifice himself for you, that he would listen to you when you're frustrated, that even when you're angry and make false accusations, he's patient and he's listening and he's willing to say, you know what, you're right on this point, but actually this one, you might be a little off here. You haven't gotten this right. Would that be someone that would not be attractive? Of course he would, because he sees you as beautiful and precious. He lifts you up. He doesn't reduce you to an object to be consumed and used, and your value isn't based on your looks, your Instagram followers, or what you do in the bedroom. That is wonderful and beautiful, and that is how husbands, that is how you men are referred to and what you're challenged to be like. And let me tell you, if you've got a man who's like that, you're going to have no problem being submissive to that person, because here's what that person is not going to do. They're not going to belittle you. They're not going to invalidate your opinions, your feelings, the justification of your arguments. When you make a good and valid point, they're going to acknowledge that as well. And they're going to be basing decisions based on your best welfare, not on achieving their goal or to be right or to win a conversation. That is just a good overall healthy relationship. That's what we should all strive for daily, not just wives, but husbands as well. So let me go further. So that's what the wives review. We're called to be submissive. But here we go, husbands. So gentlemen, this is referred to as you in the room. Love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church. Y'all, ladies, a godly man is supposed to present you as like a radiant church. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. If you want to even go into depth, just read Song of Solomon. It's the book that every pastor is most terrified to preach on because it's saucy. But what it talks about is uplifting the woman and seeing her as precious and beautiful. So present her to himself as a radiant church, meaning he's not going to violate, he's not going to degrade you, he's not going to oppress you, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish. He's supposed to treat his wife as beautiful and precious, as holy and blameless, it says in verse 27. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church, for we are all members of this body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a profound mystery. This again points back to the spiritual. But I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect the husband. That last verse, 33, is really key, because it shows that this is not while man is the head of the family, husband is the head of the family, he is also submissive unto God. And so we see that this is a partnership in equal submission unto God. And when we have that partnership, we see that there is beautiful harmony within the home and the potential for great flourishing. Again, I say this as this is the ideal. This is what we are to strive for and search for. And our culture has kind of warped marriage a little bit. And honestly, all you gotta do is look at some of these bridal magazines. So back in the day, marriage was understood for what it was. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't the bride's day. It was a covenant to be made before God that you were going to join together and actually reflect the nature of God within your lives to pursue ministry forevermore. It was that realization that me and this other person, man, we can kick tail for the kingdom together. And we're coming together to unite that, not only to be able to do ministry together, but also to be able to pass on this teaching and a reflection of God to our children for further generations. But today it's kind of a superficial presentation, like, oh my goodness, we'll bring up Jesus, during the whole 1 Corinthians 13 and love and 1 Corinthians 13, but after about maybe that 3-minute reference to God, it's all about the color patterns and the dress and the honeymoon and all that things. And I think in a way we've kind of gone a little worldly with our understanding of what marriage is, but when we actually truly understand that this is just not something you do after you've been dating 2.5 years, or, I don't think I'm going to find anyone better, and I don't feel like swiping right anymore. Instead, I'm just going to settle with this one person. No, it's actually a next step within ministry of together, me and this person, man, we can do great work for the kingdom together. There's a great quote. He was a prince, Nicholas V. I'll have to look it up once I'm done. I love it because the day after his wedding, he looked toward his wife. This was the early 1900s, like 1901. And he goes, now together, we must help each other on our way toward heaven. And I love that perspective of marriage. Is yes, they celebrated the communion, they celebrated the consummation of marriage, but he recognized that from this moment forth, we are working together to help each other get to heaven. And that's what marriage is supposed to be. Now this accurate view of marriage also pours directly into our kids. But before we get there, I thought it would be fun for us to see how we're a little glitchy here. Sorry, internet's a little wonky, so my images might come up a little scratchy. It also nourishes the flourishing of the family, but I thought before we get to that, we play a fun game to recognize the difference and importance of men and women in marriage, so fathers and mothers. So this is a fun game. We're gonna play Who Said It. So I'm going to put up a quote, and you have to tell me, was this the dad who said this, or the mom who said this? So, oh, sweetie, did you hurt yourself? Who said that, mom or dad?
Mom.
Definitely mom.
Definitely mom. All right. You know what would make this better? Fire.
Dad.
Dad, that's easy. Okay, all right, here we go. This was an actual tweet that went viral. Don't give the new flashlights to the kids. Turns out they're also tasers.
That's the dad.
That is dad. Yes. I know, a bit tricky, right? My husband actually got this one wrong. He was like, well, clearly that was mom. I'm like, how would we?
No, Dad found that out the hard
Dad?
way.
Yeah.
Mom wouldn't have made that mistake.
Mom would never bought the taser light, which those are actually things. You can actually get flashlights with tasers on the bottom. Dad would have discovered it because one coworker tased the other, and then his next response would be, actually, let's see how long it takes them to figure it out. I have 3 boys, and that is exactly how that would have played out. All right, here we go. Last one. The newsletter said prom is coming up. Is there someone special you're thinking of inviting? Mom! Oh my gosh, I've got a 15-year-old. And if I can ask him about his little heathen friends all day long, he doesn't get offended. Look, 15-year-old guys, y'all know, that's the best word to describe you. But if I ask about a certain girl that I've noticed texting, oh my goodness, the fallout. Why are you asking me all these questions? You never ask about your friend, my other friends. That's because I know your other friends. My mom, or our moms and I text each other. Bonus round, who took these pictures? Oh, I didn't show the others. All right. It had oh, that one's not showing up. Okay, so it had a baby with a mustache drawn on it, one with a watermelon that had eye holes cut out, and one with Cheerios stacked on the head. Who?
Those sound all like
that.
Yes, Trig, those were all dads, yes. So, that's one thing that's amazing is when you actually go on like Google Images or whatever, and you put dad with kids or dad with babies, you get stuff like this. And when you get mom with babies, it's like lovey-dovey, Instagram worthy, all sorts of imaginal stuff. That's great. And that's because parents actually contribute to amazing complementary aspects of child rearing that are both necessary in a child's life. So, parental, even though this is blurry, who is on the homemade skateboard riding down a hill with the kids? Dad, right? Obviously, he's got helmets, bonus point. Well, 2 of them have helmets, so. 2 out of 3.
She has a lot of hair.
Yeah, she's got goggles on, right? Like, that's totally gonna work out.
will
Okay.
soften the landing.
Absolutely. So mothers and fathers actually contribute to different attributes of their child's upbringing in a complementary manner, and it's wonderful. So when it comes to discipline, so women are more relational by nature. On average, women are more relational by nature. So when it comes to discipline with the kids, mom is more likely to sit down and have a talk about why you messed up, what was the reasoning why you messed up, the implications of your actions, and the fallout and repercussions. How many of you had a mom that would sit there when you got in trouble and you were in for at least a 15 to 45-minute conversation on your failings in life? Right? That's mom. Dad, on the other hand, is more reactive. It's more pointed, direct. So, case in point, I mentioned that I have 3 boys. We get a lot of phone calls from the school very regularly. And so when I get a phone call from the school, I'm like, hey, so got a phone call from the school. Y'all were staging a rodeo in the bathroom. You want to explain to me the logic behind that one? Conversation. Husband comes home, he gets the same, there was a real event, by the way, staged a rodeo in the bathroom, and then posted it to social media, which is how they got busted. Yeah, my kid was the camera one, so what, just to set the stage, middle school, one kid was the bull, the other kid got on his shoulders, he was the cowboy, they used the bathroom stall as a chute. My son was the camera guy, and the other one said, go, and so they burst out of the bathroom, they're ramming each other into the walls, crashing in, they're filming, and they'd text each other to, instead of math class, they staged a rodeo. They posted it, one of his dumb friends posted it to social media, and that's how he got caught, is because my son made a comment and the principal recognized his voice. So, we got the phone call. So I came home, wanted to have a discussion about why we don't stage rodeos in the middle of math class. My husband comes home, he goes, hey, dummy, I got a phone call from your school. Why are you being a moron? That was the conversation. He goes, you know you're grounded, right? It took all of 2 minutes. That's more the guy approach. When it comes to discipline, men are more direct and sort of reaction-oriented rather than women, because men, on average, recognize that actions have immediate consequences, and they naturally want to impart that on their children. Women, on the other hand, are more relational oriented. They understand that most of existence are based on relationships, so you have to know how to accurately interact with people around you, so you know, get punched in the face, or get in trouble, or just have good friendships and that sort of thing. So women are more likely to have conversations and help them experience and understand why it is they got to that thought process, which for boys, fun fact, how many of you are under the age of 26? Oh, good, majority of you. Okay, prefrontal cortex, that's the part that registers good critical thinking, logical outcomes, and the implication of your actions. That doesn't finish developing until age 26, which is why guys do dumb stuff longer than women. Women's prefrontal cortex develops more quickly, so we are less inclined to crawling into a shopping cart and shoving it down a hill for views. So fun fact. I know it's fun, but when you think of a video where you've seen that happen, you will never see a female in that shopping cart. It's always a guy.
That's valid.
Yeah.
There's usually fireworks. Okay, so discipline. Men, again, are more direct. Women are more, they expand, want people to think well about the logical implications, which is good because, like I said, for boys, since this doesn't finish developing until age 26, it does flicker occasionally. It's like a back alley street light. It's there, it flickers, but most of the time that sucker is off and you can't find the extra light bulb. But it's like a muscle as well, to where if you train and use it, that muscle becomes stronger. Women are more inclined in strengthening the muscles. Men are more reactive. What about play? So for play, women are more focused on, like I said, the relational, of explaining a story and that sort of thing. That's why their plays are often more intricate. Whereas for men, it's rough and tumble. Like when you wanted to wrestle, did you go to mom or did you go to dad? You go to dad or to an uncle or grandpa or whatever, or an older boy cousin. Like it happens in my house all the time. I've got 15, 13, and 11. My husband and my sons, they just look at each other and then for whatever reason, they're getting chucked across the room. It's a thing. I don't get it, but it's what they do. But here's what's great about that. So actually, this whole rough and tumble play is integral to child development. So what rough and tumble play teaches, especially a young boy, is self-control and proper aggression channeling. So what happens is when a small boy is wrestling with dad, he learns very quickly that biting and kicking are not appropriate, that you have to channel your aggression. And so boys, through this play, recognize, okay, I have a healthy outlet for my aggression, but I also know if I bite dad, I'm probably gonna get smacked upside the head. And you don't really bite people, that's not how you do things. In fact, Yo Gabba Gabba, one of these kids shows, some of you already know it, there was a great song that he sang that said, we don't bite our friends. One of the other ways to learn not to bite your friends is by rough and tumble play. Well, here's what's fascinating about that, is studies have shown that boys who engage in rough and tumble play with their fathers actually have lower instances of aggression as adults. So this concept of toxic masculinity is like, oh gosh, who's that really aggressive guy? I don't know, I'll text my son, he'll know his name. What they found is that toxic masculinity is actually a sign that a child did not have a male present within their life, not that dad was there. So oftentimes, especially the feminist side of things, will say, oh, toxic masculinity, that's because of these hyper-masculine men nurturing these boys. No, that's not the case. Actually, it's the absence of a man that causes toxic masculinity, because these boys grow up without a role model teaching them how they're supposed to act and behave, and how they are supposed to channel their aggression. Because again, testosterone, which nurtures aggression, drive, all of these things, it has to be channeled. It cannot be extinguished in men. So it's kind of like those superhero stories where it's, you know, somebody's just shooting lasers everywhere and they're like, no, you have to channel your power. That is what a dad does within a child's lifetime, is he helps channel that child's aggression, power, self-control, all of those things. It also has positive benefits on girls as well, because girls naturally have a drive for male affection, not in a sexual way, but just for male affection. Daddy's girl is an often concept to where they want to feel, they know that dad is a protector, that he loves and protects them, and dad provides a proper model of what they are to look for in a man, what they should look for in being treated, how to reason out these guys who are just in it for some action and not really in it for a relationship or them as a person. Dad is actually integral in the development of their children, male and female. So when a dad is present, a girl, when she grows up into a woman, she will have less risky sexual decision-making behaviors. Boys will have less instances of aggression, police run-ins, run-ins with the law, all these sorts of great things. So it actually helps nurture both male and female. Mom as well. Boys actually learn from their mothers, again, what to look for in a wife, how to treat women. That is why boys who are raised with a lot of sisters are often more empathetic and patient with women than boys who are grown up with a lot of boys, because again, they had to deal with all the emotions and all the feelings, and they had a great OJT situation within their home of how they are to interact within the family. However, when mom is absent or when dad is absent, these children don't lose their desire for the other parents. In fact, one thing that's often said is, well, children just need love and stability. So it doesn't matter if they have two moms or two dads, or if there's a divorce situation. As long as they equally love the kids, then the kids will be fine. But statistically, that's false. In fact, in same-sex marriages, the children have this drive for the parent that is missing. They have this biological drive for them, and oftentimes they have internalized guilt because they're like, I desire this dad. Yes, I love my two moms. They're wonderful. They're patient with me. They teach me all these great things. but they're not a dad. I just want a dad. And same on the flip side with a boy. Yes, I've got two dads, and they're great, but I just want a mom. I want, and we actually see this in movies. How many movies have we seen where a child is searching for a lost parent? But we never see movies on a child searching for mom's old boyfriend. It's because there's not that biological drive, there's not that pull. And so children need that male and female relationship because without it, their identity isn't fully grounded. They're always wondering who they are, which is why those stories of children who are switched at birth, or children who are adults and they find out that they were the product of maybe an egg donation or an adoption, they have an existential crisis. They don't know who they are because they don't know their biological origins. So it's so important, nurtured within the family. It's not just about love and security. It's also just as much, as Katie Faust says in her book, Then Before Us, about biology and the function of marriage. Cognitive development. Mom and dad also teaches very different aspects of cognitive development. So dad is good with oftentimes gears, mechanics, of seeing sort of the big picture. Mom is more scoped in, fine motor skills. It's usually mom teaching the little one how to use scissors and how to write with the pencils, because women, we do a better job with the fine and motor details. And self-confidence and respect for others, as I mentioned before, equally nurtured but differently within dad and mom. So mom will help a child feel more secure in that identity. Mothers help daughters know who they are as women, especially if they are taught from a biblical womanhood standards. So oftentimes today, biblical womanhood is seen as kind of like, oh, she's got to be frilly and delicate and soft-spoken and quiet and make amazing cupcakes and have an Instagram feed to rival everyone. That's not biblical womanhood. Actually, when you look within scripture, yes, the Marthas are biblical women, but you know who else are biblical women? The Deborahs, who were the judges over Israel, who were standing on the edge of the battlefield cheering on Barak as they destroyed an army. They are brave, they are wise, they are commanding. They're also the jails, who were willing to tent a military leader's head to the ground rather than compromise their faith. Women are tough. Don't mess with us, especially for godly women. We get stabby. So, just kidding. I love that a speaker shared that at a Mother's Day conference a while ago, and I thought it was just so perfect. So women and men nurture different aspects of a child that really help develop them as a whole person. Again, ideally. I know that that is not often the real world case. Sometimes you can have men who are completely absent as fathers, or mothers who are too distracted or into their own lives or just distant to nurture their children. But the ideal setting, our goal as biblical women, especially if you've accepted Christ as your Savior, for a man and a woman, your role is to properly convey who God is and nurture the whole person of your child. You're not going to be perfect at it. I promise you, you're going to mess up. I mess up daily with my kids. But our goal is the sanctification process. Every day there's forgiveness and renewing, and we keep going and doing the best that we can for our others, especially our children. Because what it ultimately does is not only convey spiritual truths, but it also helps them in their treatment of others. Again, when mom and dad are present, working together to the nurturing of their children are well behaved, oftentimes balanced. In fact, oftentimes when there's problems within the family, it can manifest even in behavioral issues of children. So that's why it's so important for us to do our best to reflect that, because it not only impacts our child's current and present development, it also has huge lasting impacts on their future relationships, as well as their understandings within society, who they are as people, and their relationship to God. In fact, there was one girl just recently, you've probably seen it, all these articles that are coming out now, about how girls especially have been disproportionately affected by the negativity within social media. There's increased rates of depression and anxiety and all of these things. And one of the girls' testimonies that I read within this article, she was talking about how there was basically no hope for her, because what she had been told is that as a woman, the world is not made for you. Jobs are not made for you, they're geared for the men. The workforce is for the men. There's no hope for you within this. If you have a problem, people aren't going to listen to you because you're a woman. They're going to discount your feelings. And so this girl had been told over and over and over something that's irrefutable about her biology was going to completely separate her from society. And there was no hope for that. Is it any wonder why this girl was depressed and anxious? This is a perfect example of why it's so important for women to not only have other women and men pouring into them saying, no, baby, yeah, everybody's going to go through different struggles. There's going to be different challenges. I was in the military, in the Air Force. I was ridiculed, I was made fun of. When I made advancements within the military, I was accused of, so one of the awards I got is called Below the Zone. It's where, I was in the Air Force, it's where you make rank, you're awarded rank 6 months before everybody else because of your work ethic, your community service, how involved you were. I worked my tail off to get this. And what I was told is, no, you weren't given below the zone because of your hard work. It's because of what you did below the desk. That's what got it for you. So basically, prostituting myself out there to get rank. Yes, that was what I was accused of, but is that who I am? And was it true? No. But if we do not have other men and women pouring into this next generation, saying, no, this is what womanhood is, this is what manhood is. Yes, you're going to run through trials. Just because somebody says something doesn't make it true. Then they're going to be without that support network. They're going to be lost in this false belief that who they are is irrelevant and that they're never going to make it within the world. Which is why marriage is beautiful, because it's a micro society as well as a micro church. So St. Lucia, she made this quote that she goes, the last battle between God and Satan is going to be over marriage and the family. And I don't know exactly if that's true, but I do like the sentiment of it, for one, because that is what we're seeing under attack right now. Because our culture knows that if they can destroy the family, they can actually destroy a witness and a testimony to the existence of God. So that is why it's under assault. And it directly negatively impacts the children at every single turn. When a mother and a father lose their biological right to their own children, then the children are the ones who suffer the loss. And we get these placeholders like, oh, they just need love and validation, and oh, just somebody to step in. But statistically speaking, even step-parents or live-in boyfriends, they're exorbitantly more likely to experience abuse than at the hands of their biological parents. In fact, I've done studies with toddler or preschoolers. So preschoolers of a relationship where it's maybe mom and a live-in boyfriend are 120% more likely to be abused than of biological parents. Now, this is not to say that a mixed marriage, meaning like a step-parent marriage, is always going to fail. That's not true. I mean, Jesus was a part of that. His father was not his biological father, and it was a good, nurturing relationship. But by and large, when we get outside of God's design, that is where we often see brokenness. So why this is also important. I brought this up because I love, Barna is fantastic for research, but if you notice, look at how instrumental parents are on the nurturing of core aspects of faith and identity. And identity is directly tied to faith. So ladies, we, I mean, even if you don't have kids currently or you plan to, we're dark blue line here. So questions about the faith, something that bothers you in the Bible, they're going to mom first. Dad is the salmon pink line, the pretty pink line, and grandparents are the teal. So dad is right up there. In fact, actually politics, dad beats out everyone, and as a mom, I'm super good with that. Go talk to dad about Biden, sweetie. I'm good with giving up ground. Friends is the gray line here. That's friends. And for sex, it definitely makes sense, right? Because if any of us had a question about sex, we asked our friends at the lunch table first, right? Rather than mom and dad. But, you know, the lunch table shared ignorance. And so we go to mom and dad second. But the reason I brought this up is because it actually shows how important and influential parents are regarding these core concepts that shape a child's identity, and why it's so great when mom and dad can come together and actually be united on this front, because it helps nurture the child. Because the perspective of mom on faith and the Bible and when something bothers you is very different than what dad is going to share. That's why moms, we like to discuss and analyze. Guys are action-oriented. Ladies, if we're ever having a problem, and if we go and vent to our boyfriend, in y'all's case, or my husband, like, he'll listen, but he's always action-oriented. I'm like, no, I just want you to listen to me right now and validate my anger. I don't need solutions. Guys offer different perspectives. So, I wanted to finish up with a few tips. Because one thing that we've lost in our culture today is the purpose of dating. So dating is entered into completely haphazardly, at will, and basically kind of for our own, oh, if we get the feels, well, of course I'm going to go on the date. Now, one of the reasons why dating is so challenging to address is because back during the biblical times when we look through scripture, there wasn't really a concept of dating. That's not how things were done. Back in the day, your parents and the parents of your potential betrothed would get together and they would talk to see if the children would potentially get along. And then the children were able to meet each other and see if maybe they would hit it off. And then they would agree based on mutual understanding whether or not the marriage was going to work out. And then about a year later, the man would show up at the woman's house and say, hey lady, we're going to get married today. And then boop, they'd go off and get married. What do y'all think? You want to sign up for that today? Like, yeah, not too many people would sign up for their parents picking out their future spouses, right? But when we actually look at Christ's example to the church and the biblical commands for how we are supposed to treat each other, specifically, I believe it's Mark 20, 30 through 32. What we see is that we are to love God with all of our heart, soul, and minds first, and then we are to love others as ourselves, the two greatest commandments. And that is actually how we're supposed to navigate even the dating sphere. For one, it's supposed to start off in reverence to God. Our focus should not be on finding Mr. Right or Miss Right. Instead, our focus needs to be Christ-centered. Then it needs to be on our own character development. So often we're hyper concerned with finding the best person who will suit us, when really we need to be asking, are we the best person for somebody else? And what are maybe some things that I need to work on personally? Maybe I've got a patience issue or a selfishness issue, and how can I work that out so that way, when and if God does bring me somebody, then I will be in a better position to love them as Christ loved the church. That Ephesians 5:22 through 33 method. Then we need to have right perspective. So again, our culture today likes to focus on dating as in this person needs to meet my needs. It's very self-centered in a way. And the second they don't validate me or meet my needs or do what I want them to do, or when I get frustrated, then I'm going to bail. And no, the focus is wait a second, my call is to go make disciples of all nations. Is this somebody that when we link up together within marriage, are we going to be able to do ministry well together? Because whatever relationship you're in is going to shape your influence. A single person has more freedom to go out and do things, whether it's for the kingdom or for themselves. You have complete and utter liberty, which is why Paul is saying, it's best for people to remain single like I am. I just went, for the longest time when I read that, I'm like, well, poor Paul just had a bad first date. But in reality, he had proper perspective. He recognized that for the kingdom, he has more freedom to go out and do things as needed as a single person than as a married person. And a married couple, while they don't have the same liberties as a single couple, they can do a lot of great things together that a single person can't. However, even that is shaped once you have kids into the mix as well. And while there's still an active part of ministry, it also shapes how we reflect others. So having a right perspective, again, is I need to cherish this person as Christ cherishes them, recognize their imago Dei, that image bearer status within that individual, and treat them rightly, and then for the furtherance of the kingdom. Fourth, foundational agreement. So if you flip open any Cosmo magazine, which I don't recommend because it's utter garbage, they often have all sorts of dating tips. And one of the things they tell you not to do on a first date is discuss what? If you guys just had to guess. What are you not supposed to discuss on the first date?
Religion.
Faith, religion, yes. Okay, what else?
Commitment.
Commitment, politics. Okay, what else? Children. Oh my gosh, yes. Don't talk about any of that stuff. Commitment, that's an interesting one because especially during hookup culture, one of the most negative things you can be labeled with on a college campus is someone who is clingy. And that is someone who, after a hookup experience, wants to have a further relationship. They're seen as clingy. No, you should just be able to use that person like you would a solo cup and then move on. And if you have any emotional attachment to them, then that's actually damaging and wrong. But that's a complete denial of biology if you remember from the beginning of the talk. So remember those bonds I talked about how they bond husband and wife, vasopressin, oxytocin? Well, those same chemicals are secreted within the brain during a hookup setting. Only what happens is when the relationship is broken, that hardwiring within the brain is also broken. And when you find another relationship, it forms again and then breaks, forms, breaks, forms, breaks. And just like calluses will build up on your hand from repeated use, same within the brain. Your brain will actually hardwire itself not to commit to another human being out of self-preservation. That is why studies have shown that people who've had more hookup experiences prior to marriage have a higher divorce rate because they have actually wired their brain to be unable to commit to their future partner. So that's why it's so important, again, to have that right perspective when it comes to dating. But I'm sorry, I went on a rabbit trail. That foundational agreement, all those things we talked about, politics, religion, children, commitment, job, even having aspiration, out of your job, all of those things are said, oh, don't talk about those are the touchy issues. No, you want to talk about those. Seriously, talk about them on the first date. Because here's the thing, on the first date, you're not as emotionally committed to that person as you are on the 10th date. And what you want to do is make sure you are found on the same foundations and have agreement in those same foundations before you get your emotions involved, because those are what strengthen a relationship. Those are what hold a key together. You have to have those same agreements. That's why it says in scripture not to be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. Yes, somebody can come to faith, or maybe you end up converting to their faith, but it's also very rare. And oftentimes, once a marriage happens, it will cause tension. I can speak from personal experience. Well, I've been married for 16 years. Prior to that, when I was 19, I entered into an impulsive marriage with another troop. And he was the first guy to ever tell me that I was pretty or special, and he didn't mind that I went to church. And so I didn't find out all these foundational things. And instead, I'm like, well, this person says he likes me, and he likes when I go to church. So what's the problem in us getting married? And we got married, and as cliche as it sounds, shortly after we got married, he completely changed. And he became very angry and frustrated every time I went to church. He would accuse me of infidelity when I would leave to go on mission trips and that sort of things, because why would anybody want to go and actually serve within a church? Clearly I was having a relationship. And after he committed infidelity, the relationship ended up falling apart. And it was because these foundational things, for one, I didn't flesh out who he was as a person prior to that. But then two, I glossed over the importance of being united on religion. Even politics is important to discuss as well. Not key, but it is important. And it's important to have those foundational things because, again, you are going to have trials within your marriage, and you need to have a firm foundation in Christ, because sometimes that foundation is all you're going to have. And from there, you can build up and create anything. Fifth, semper gumby. This is a military phrase. Tongue-in-cheek, it means always flexible. It means that in relationships, things are going to change. You're going to have stuff come out of the blue. When my husband and I moved to Texas, he said, you know, Amy, I think God's bringing us here for a change. And I said, well, that's fine, as long as it's you not getting out of the military. And then he went into work and opened up his email. And during force reductions, what they did is they send out mass emails just randomly picking people to become civilians. And he opened his email and he said, congratulations, Sergeant Davison, you are now a civilian. Immediate 100% change. We lost insurance, job security, everything completely unexpected. But God was in it. When he ended his last day in the military, the very next day, he started a new job. Was I okay during that time? Nope. I was a big old ball of anxiety. I was not okay in one way, shape, or form. However, I had faith that God was faithful, and my husband, I had to have faith in my husband, and through that time of immense trial for myself, I learned that, you know what, through flexibility and faith in God, you can overcome. And lastly, a relationship, whether dating or marriage, it needs to be based on truth and grace. Because if we expect our husbands to fulfill every emotional need and to never make any sort of wrong decision, same with our wives, if we expect wives to be perfect, a size 2, to never have an emotional outburst, any of that stuff, we are going to be very quickly disappointed. But when we love like Christ, we will have that truth and grace, and our relationship will be nurtured, because again, it's Christ-focused, not people-focused. And when we're Christ-focused, we're going to love our spouses like Christ loved the church. And that is what's going to hold us through the storms. So that is why it's so important for biblical marriage. Can secular marriage have these aspects? Absolutely. It can. I've seen wonderful, great secular marriages. But everything that makes their marriage great was originally created, designed, nurtured, and promoted by God. So that's where the grounding is. So I thank you so much for sitting here today as we discuss biblical marriage. I'm more than welcome to take questions. If you have them, concerns, critiques, any of those things, I'm here for y'all, and I just appreciate this time together. All right, y'all, circle of trust.
Sure, you guys must have some questions or comments. Don't be shy.
I saw a TED Talk where I believe there was it talked about sort of the bonding between men and women. Mm-hmm. And from what I remember hearing from the TED Talk, this woman who studied sort of that, she actually, I believe, found that men bond over time rather than through intercourse. And that's why the whole wait till marriage was also even like scientifically accurate of men are more committed after being during long times of not necessarily like having sex and having that connection that I believe like the TED Talk mentioned, where for women it was correct, like it was based on sex, they went straight to bonding from the oxytocin, but the men, I believe it was the vasopressin that built up over time, and I think it was like a spike in testosterone which like inhibits vasopressin during sex is what I remember hearing.
Interesting.
And so that's why men are it's easy for men to sort of do hookup culture and to not get sort of committed, whereas for women it's not. But that's why that's what I believe I remember. But it also, I thought that was really cool because it kind of also built up like the idea of there's scientific evidence for waiting on both ends.
Yeah, no, and that's a really great point, because we actually see that also further within God's design, because guys, so relationship-wise, within men and women, guys are more sex-focused, women are more relationship-focused, as you watched in the TED Talk. So, while a guy's first impulse is to, especially it's nurtured within culture, is to, kind of check out a gal and see if they would quote-unquote hit that. When they're actually able to form that bond and relationship, they see them as a person, they get to know them, that's bonded through that friendship. And so we actually see that reinforced, so that's great. But yeah, vasopressin does also work in that. But prior to marriage, obviously that vasopressin through sex would not be occurring. So we see also vasopressin coming through emotional connection as well, which also furthers the importance of waiting until marriage, because then you have that focus of the whole person and nurturing them and not reducing them as more of like an object, which we see. There's a great book, it's called Our Bodies Tell God's Story by Christopher West. And what he talks about within there is that marriage is actually this marriage of eros and agape. So eros is that more sexual, intimate love, whereas agape is self-sacrificial love. And so true love is that combination, which is why, the symbolism within Christianity of giving one's whole self to another person. Like that's what we even see within the sex act. You are completely vulnerable. You're naked. You're giving yourself to the other person. And what is actually within this biblical setting is that self-sacrificial of I'm going to hold back my God-designed desires, sexual arousal, that sort of thing, because again, I don't want to reduce you to an object. But then within that marriage, you get that whole blessing of that eros and agape together, which we then see nurturing the family. So that's really interesting. I wouldn't mind seeing that TikTok.
Or
If you can find it to me, I would love it to text it. Yeah, there's a great, there's so many good books, especially on studying the neuroscience and neurobiology of the brain and bonding. They have so many great resources out there now and what's fascinating is they do back up God's design. All right, any other questions or thoughts?
This is somewhat related. I've struggled talking to friends and stuff who don't follow these beliefs, right?
Yeah.
So how do you how do you walk that line of last weekend my friend was like, oh, me and my boyfriend are moving in together. It's you say congrats, because you have to respect that they don't follow these values. But I don't know if you have any advice on dealing with that.
How do you seek out good advice, or how do you navigate situations where you're friends with somebody who have a different worldview?
That navigate with friends that have different worldview and things that are supposed to be celebrated, but according to the world. But how do you?
Yeah, and that's hard, especially in today's culture, because we're very much affirmation focused within our culture, where if you do not affirm everybody's life choice, decision, that sort of thing, you're seen as vilifying or attacking the other person. So especially if you've got a friend who's living out another worldview, it's hard to know how to respond because, like you had said, you don't want to affirm something that inherently isn't good. So, how to respond in that situation? Golly, honestly, I would have to think about that because you put in that tense spot of, what do you say? And the world says that you should marry. In fact, I just saw a response from the gal that says, don't ever marry anyone unless you've lived with them for 2 years. Because then after the 2-year mark, apparently you know everything about the person, and if you're qualified for marriage.
And they can change.
So,
It might differ too, if the person is a Christian or not, because
if it's a Christian, you can offer that accountability.
yeah, exactly. Or it depends on your relationship. Are they looking to you for advice, or is it more of just a casual?
Yeah.
If it's a casual non-Christian, I don't know that it's.
Yeah.
you're not under a
I've
lot
been-
of pressure to
Yeah,
try
I've just
to.
seen that a lot because I have like, a lot of non-Christian friends.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's hard to know how to respond to those situations, I guess.
Yeah. I would
Sorry.
say, I would have to think about a good response to that.
It probably is case dependent, which makes it hard.
Yeah, and it's how close you are with the person, because then you know their personality, right? Because you can actually, because even secular studies have found that cohabitating couples are more likely to break up, to not get married. I mean, you don't even have to appeal to biblical studies to recognize that, oh, this probably isn't the best decision. Maybe even ask them, oh, really, what motivated you to move in together? Because a lot of times people are moving in together because it's so expensive. And I know, it's so expensive to have an apartment or a house as a single person, and especially if they have a same-sex, roommate. Then when that roommate moves out, they're like, okay, well, what do I do? Well, I've got this boyfriend or girlfriend that I've been together with, and we, like each other, so why not move in? And then it's cheaper for both of us, and it's seen more as convenience, as well as, the added bonus of having this person close by. So, that may be a good next question too, if you didn't obviously, say, oh, congratulations, they'll be like, oh, what led you guys to decide to move in together? And then if they say, oh, well, this is just what you do, this is the next step, and then, you adopt a dog together, and then, you might buy a car together, and then after, a certain amount of time decide to marry. And then depending on the response given, you'll be like, well, actually, it might be better to find like another roommate. If they're the type of person we can discuss some of these issues, and we can venture into that with them, if they're open and willing. But if they're just looking for, applause or whatever, just be like, oh, okay, wow, that is a big life decision that you're making. And then you can, launch into other conversations from there.
Okay, that's
So-
helpful, thank you.
Yeah, if anybody else has insight, if you've dealt with this, again, I'm like 16 years having this conversation, I'm kind of rusty there, so.
By the way, we do have 3 married couples in here right now,
Aw,
so,
where?
yes.
Aw.
There.
2 and 3.
Okay, that's right, because you were just getting married last year.
Yeah.
That's right. I remember, because you were planning and planning, you were so excited.
And they just moved into a house, a brand new
Oh
house.
my gosh, how exciting, homeowners, and you get to find out all the things that leak
Yeah.
and don't work.
At least it's a new house,
Oh my
but they
gosh.
did have to fix some things during inspection.
Adulting is so fun. All right, any other questions, comments?
I have a question that is kind of impractical, but you have mentioned a lot of points for like, okay, this is why you need to have a father and a mother in your childhood growing up years.
Yeah.
What if you have 2 fathers and 2 mothers? Isn't this like twice as good,
Double the flavor, double the fun type of situation. Okay, so I'm guessing what has occurred is a divorce and a remarriage, yes?
No, I'm like, because you're mentioning like Utah, you can, have, who knows what's going on.
Oh,
A
right.
4-way
Oh,
couple.
gotcha. Hypothetical. Oh, yes. And actually, that's one of the arguments, is right? Is, well, if you have more parents, you have more love.
Yeah, so what about that?
Yes,
How do you-
statistically, that's completely inaccurate.
Okay.
Because what happens is, okay, I hope this doesn't sound crass, more women, more problems. Like, that's a common phrase. When you have a household that has multiple couples involved, there is a power dynamic that immediately ensues. So especially there's an example given of a throuple situation where you've got 2 couples, they each have their own children, but they're basically wife swapping or husband swapping within it. What ends up happening is the welfare of the children are neglected for the power struggle within the parents' dynamics. So that's what happens. And the thing is biologically, a parent will be more inclined to take care of their own biological children, where they are less likely to be motivated for non-biological children. You can actually find this in Reddit boards, community chat rooms. You will have step-parents saying, stepmom, I'm sorry, I don't have any attraction toward my stepchildren. I don't have any affection for them. Well, it's biologically rooted because they're not biological children. You don't have that natural drive. Now, that doesn't mean that all cases are going to be like this, but on average, statistically speaking, when there is no biological connection between parent and child, there is not that motivation for affection, care, and provision for that child. So in that throuple situation, quad situation, the children's welfare is actually second, third. I mean, it is pushed way down the list because it's hyper-focused on the parents getting what they want, whether sexually, emotionally, whatever. So the children are actually at a detriment. They're actually, the more people are involved in the household, the more irrelevant and isolated they feel. And this is just proven statistically. So, yeah, may have been an impractical question, but it has a very real application to the kids, and the kids often, or nearly always experience the fallout because it's hyper-focused on the needs of the parents, not the needs of the child. So.
And the kids could easily discern that. I can imagine there'd be all kinds of issues, like,
Yeah.
you're paying more attention with these other
Yeah, there's
kids
rivalry
and-
within kids, and I've seen it personally within my own family. There's been situations to where the biological children of the husband, not the wife, they are excluded and ran out for the primacy of the biological children of the mothers, and vice versa. I mean, you see this happening. There's that bias there. Again, this isn't every case, but overwhelmingly, these are not good cases. Same with same-sex couples. Children are statistically, it's like 4.3 times more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and obesity within this setup than their heterosexual married parent counterpart kids. So it is unfortunately backed up by some rather sad statistics. But no, good question. Thank you.
Where would, is there any good source for a lot of these statistics, preferably like in a?
I can't give it to you, it's my only copy, but feel free to look through it. It's a wonderful resource. I'm friends with Katie Faust. She lives in the Pacific Northwest. We're actually from the same area in Washington State. And so she partnered with all sorts of researchers, and they actually dove deep into the statistical basis for having a child rights centered movement. All of these movements that we're seeing now on marriage equality, it's hyper-focused on the adults to the detriment of the children. And so what she's advocating more is for a children's rights movement where we put the children's rights at the forefront, which will again nurture the family better, because now it says that, okay, children have a biological right to their mother and father. And now, like today, in many states, if you've got an adoptive couple, well, on the birth certificate, it's the adoptive parent that can be put on there rather than the biological parent. So now this child, when they go back to see who their parents were, whether it's for medical reasons or just understanding their genetic history, they have been completely cut off from their biological history. And that's detrimental to the child's formation of their own identity. And so, again, all of these rights that are supposedly for the parents, giving the adoptive parents the rights, it actually strips the rights of the children in the process. And so we need more children's rights, is the book here done before us. We need a children's rights movement rather than a parental rights movement.
Do you know what are the stats these days in terms of like what proportion of kids are living in a home with both biological parents?
Oh, I'd have to look that up. That is one that I did not look up prior to coming
Or
here.
like, what is the rate of even just kids being born out of wedlock now?
It's deeply increased since the 1980s, to where we've seen a huge influx of families that are having children out of wedlock and just not getting married, more cohabitating couples. Divorce rates too are on par with within Christian households as well as secular households. It's about 38%. They're about equal. And that's due, I think, in part because even though we're Christian in namesake, we still have a very secular understanding of marriage. And so the divorce rates are very similar. So kids today are more likely to encounter divorce than parents who stay together. Unfortunately, it's just a sad fact. Most of my son's friends are from a remarriage family. So it is quite common, but I'd have to look up that stat.
Okay, interesting, yeah.
I have a question too. You talked a bit about like the American law and stuff in the beginning about marriage and homosexuality and stuff like that. But what about like, do you know anything about like ancient history? I guess like you talked about how in the times that quote by St. Lucia that there'd be attack on marriage and family. But have things like this been like always happening? I guess is my question.
Well, marriage was seen as an integral institution for the flourishing of children. That is why it was more acceptable for a man to have multiple wives than for a woman to have multiple husbands, because if a man and his wife is united, especially if she was a virgin upon marriage, he knows that those children are biologically his. So the family unit, the family clan is preserved within marriage. And they also knew that children's rights as well were preserved within marriage. Now there were social experiments or thought experiments that were carried out. In fact, Plato's Republic, it's basically a thought experiment of these ideal utopian society. And one of the aspects of it is that there would be this day of sex to where the ideal couples would get together, conceive a child, and then whenever that child was born, it would then be passed from family to family. And the child would grow up never knowing its actual biological parents, because it was thought that if the society raised the family or raised the child, then the child would have a better upbringing. So we see this in Hillary Clinton's move in the late 80s, early 90s of it takes a village to raise a child. It was kind of under that similar concept of, oh, if we have a community raising a child, the child will be better formed, it'll be better for the society, but actually that's not the case. A child, when it's within a mother and father within the secure home, has a higher likelihood of job success, educational success, better behavior, less instances with run-ins of the law, all of these things just within that microfamily unit. So yeah, there's other societies that have sort of experimented with more of a communal setting. However, one thing that all ancient societies had an agreement upon was marriage. So most society, in fact, every society, they will disagree on God, the existence of the universe, all of these core issues, but one unique feature of all societies is that they agree on the concept of marriage. That it's supposed to be a man and a woman, and from which the children are to flourish and be nurtured. And that's everyone, Hindu, Islam, Christian, all of them have the same view regarding marriage, which is, from an anthropological standpoint, kind of fascinating, really, that that's the one thing that they would that they would cling to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Finally, a question from a non-married person.
Yeah, well, it better be a good one.
No pressure.
No.
So, going kind of off what we were talking about in like the last question, I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts on, because like the whole, I guess, for a lot of history, the kind of Christian ethic on marriage, where it's like, this mutual kind of respect and servitude towards one another, is not very well known in, places like middle of nowhere, feudal Japan, right? Or like, all these other kind of cultures where, you still had marriage, like you said, but the marriage, especially with how they raised their kids, was a lot more kind of, in line with, we call it honor shame culture and all of those kinds of things. So
Okay.
How would be, your thought process kind of towards, because like those cultures still exist nowadays, right? Like we still have, parents who raise their kids in these kinds of honor shame cultures way. How would you kind of respond towards that?
Like their existence, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. But like,
Like, what are the pros and cons of that versus the Christian biblical marriage, or what?
Sure, kind of along those lines.
Well, I think it's interesting when you look at the Christian worldview is everyone is asked and expected to model Christ-like behavior to each other. So it's that self-sacrificial love. When you depart from Christ, then it becomes a power struggle of whoever is the authority, whoever is the power figure. That's the person that demands the most respect, giving, all these things. Their needs then become the focus, to the detriment potentially of wife and children. And so I would say when you depart from God, when you depart from that original goodness model, then you lose that self-sacrificial love of mutual reciprocity and respect for each other. And instead, then the other person within that other culture, they kind of become like the godlike status. And just like within any sort of ancient idol worship, it's usually very one-sided. You have to be giving to the other person. And we see that. So I traveled to the Dominican Republic here recently. And one of the things that's big over there, and I didn't realize this till after I gave this talk on biblical manhood and womanhood, which probably is why I won't be asked back, is machismo. It's this concept of machismo, which is, I wouldn't necessarily call it toxic masculinity, but man, if you are a man, you are a man. Like, none of this frilly, artsy, liking flowers, that sort of stuff. Within their marriages, it is the woman is supposed to follow the man in all circumstances. The man is the leader. The woman has to submit to the man all of the time. Like, there's a gentleman that asked me and Jonathan Morrow some advice. He was looking to get married, and the woman he was looking to get married to, she wanted to complete a 1-year master's program in music theory, because his father had a music school. They're like 4th generation, like cellists and everything. And so she wanted to complete her master's degree so that way she could be a better teacher when they married and joined and worked in the school, right? Seems reasonable. Well, what was told to him was, no, you're the man of the house. You dictate when it's going to be married. She is not going off and getting this other education. No, she needs to follow after you. So what we see is an example of her needs not actually being respected and evaluated. I mean, her justification for doing so is totally fine for pursuing this education. And so we see this kind of, the woman kind of being let down, so to speak, or not being cherished in a way, being respected with her motivations, her desires, her drive. And these were all, she had submitted her desires to God and everything. So she was like, no, this, I feel God really calling me to this. Well, that was irrelevant because she was getting married. Now she needed to follow the husband in all circumstances, regardless of what her desires were, God's leading in her life.
And why should he not want that is the key thing. I
Exactly.
think.
Well, that's what his struggle was.
Yeah.
And he was like, wait a second, I want to do this for
So
my wife.
he even felt that, but
He
he
even
just
felt
felt this
that.
pressure to,
Yeah,
wow.
because of the culture. It was, no, you're the man, you exercise your authority, she follows you, and make sure she knows that. Otherwise, you need to not even get married to this gal. And so I think with other cultures, again, I would have to study which culture specifically, every case is unique. But one thing that's different is when the culture is not after Christ, what we often see is a power struggle within that relationship, and it's often focused on the man to the detriment of the woman and the children.
I think Jesus was really radical in his
Oh, 100%.
leadership of like, okay, I'm gonna wash your feet that the slaves
Yes.
didn't even do and things like that.
Yeah.
This is your model for being leadership. So
Yeah, well, even his tolerance of sinners too. I mean, the Pharisee, and we see
Yeah.
this today, right? You'll have the hyper-Christian crowd who are like, oh, how dare you associate with those sinners? And it's when Jesus was eating with tax collectors, sinners, the woman at the well, he was not eating to affirm them in their sin. He was eating with them to reach them for the gospel. And so Jesus recognized, wait a second, when I uplift a person's humanity rather than reducing them to their sin, I can actually reach them and make ways for the gospel. And that's what's just fascinating about him. He never compromised truth, but he did adjust his approach to meet the needs of the people he was speaking to without ever once sinning. And I think it's fascinating and beautiful and what we need to strive for, not just as personal believers, but as a church as a whole. All right. Oh my gosh, it's like
it's about that time,
8:30.
yeah.
Great.
So
Yeah.
perfect.
It's actually basically right.
Yeah,
on time.
you're gonna gamble with eating any of that ice cream in the back. You may need to eat it over a seat. But thank you for coming today. And yeah, if you have any further questions, I'm kind of a resource person. Like I love facts, statistics, books, that sort of thing. So if you're that kind of nerdy, like we could totally be friends. But I'll give you my email and I can get you more resources if you'd ever like to research more.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's been awesome.
Cool. So you're free to go, but if you want to stay, we're going to Canes and we'll be having more conversations there. So feel free to join us. It'll be fun. But otherwise, you're free.